Welcome back to a Boxscore Geeks Show. Keeping in line with our predecessor, the Wages of Wins podcast, we have special guests back on the show. Really happy to have. Okay, I'm just going to have you say it because you've told me you accept any pronunciation, but I think I've
Yes.
mucked it up every time. So, Chris, how do you say your last name?
Yay.
Yay. So just like yay points, which I think when when you had time, you've been busy with stuff, which we'll talk about more in future
Absolutely.
podcasts, I hope. You did have a column which was, I think, yay points, which was perfect. And that was amazing. And that's one of the reasons we've had you on this podcast today, because over the last couple of weeks, I have been Lakers centric. And then, of course, Patrick hopped in and was talking about the value of a contract with Rudy Gay. You have, you're an angel investor. You have experience with this. So this was just too much, Chris, to not have on the show. We're going to start out with 20 players better than Kobe as our first topic. I got in a Twitter argument, and some of the stuff we've talked about in past, Chris, is, discrimination in tech. And I will admit, this was the hardest I've ever been flamed. I was actually given death threats, racial slurs, and homophobic slurs for insulting Kobe.
It just goes to show you Kobe fans are insane.
It's true. I don't like using that word often, but definitely. But from that, I was like, well, I've got to make a post out of this. I'm not going to put up with this much harassment and not at least get a post. And so I came up with 20 players better than Kobe. I had a triathlon. I basically made it as much in favor as Kobe as possible. I went with just general greatness, with longevity, with popular perception, and I came up with 26 players. The 26th, I believe, was actually Gary Payton, a.k.a. The Glove, and you told me you share this nickname.
That's right. So I still play basketball probably twice a week, and the nickname that I have, which I think is not entirely humorous, is The Glove because I'm the guy that they assign to guard the toughest perimeter player.
And that's perfect. That's just like Gary Payton was. And I think you and him would have a lot in common. I don't know if I'd call you a better basketball player than Kobe, but I was actually interested in your perspective because you are a diehard Laker fan. You are also another diehard Laker fan we have that comments on the blog regularly is Jay Brett. But both of you seem to be very grounded when it comes to Kobe.
Yes. Well, again, I think that it should be important to note that you've never said that Kobe is a bad player. You've just said that Kobe tends to be overrated and that there are other players who are better than Kobe. The evidence is very clear that he is a good player. In almost all the years of his career, he's been above average. There have been some years where he's been below average, but he's never been a transcendent superstar in terms of his value to his team. And
I will cut it. I might disagree a little there. He was in the era right after they lost Shaq. He was like a top 10 NBA player. And the year they got Pau Gasol was coming back from injury.
right.
And Kobe Bryant, it did appear that Kobe Bryant was like, I want this team in the finals again. He was their best player in the regular season. He was their best player in the playoffs. It was just once they started winning championships again, he wasn't. So I want to throw that out there, Laker fans.
I agree.
2006 to 2008, Kobe Bryant was transcendent. He was the best Laker.
Let me emphasize, however, that in none of those years did he ever achieve a .3 wins produced per 48-minute mark. So he was never much higher. There were a number of years when he was a star by the classic definition of .2 or above, but he was never a superstar as in .3 or above.
Well, yeah, I think that's what I come down to on Kobe is I have to use longevity and I have to use conventional wisdom, right? I have to use things like MVP votes, finals MVPs, et cetera. Right. But the simple fact of the matter is if you look at some of the transcendent players, I'm going by modern era, but of course we even brought up that, former Lakers like Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain certainly belong on this list. But if you go by transcendent players, the first couple in the modern stats era, of course, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, of course, Michael Jordan, and now LeBron, he's just not on the same level.
No, that's absolutely correct. And I looked over the entire list of the 26 players you listed as better than Kobe. Part of it is I don't have access to all the numbers that may necessarily be relevant. But, I wouldn't really have much, as a Lakers fan, I wouldn't have much argument with many of them. I would say that the only few that where I might wonder is folks like Horace Grant and Maurice Cheeks, who I just think are historically underrated. That may be why, because during that time period, I was just watching basketball, NBA on NBC. There was no advanced stats, and so my impressions were formed at that point just based on the things that we looked at in those days.
So actually, those guys, I really some people have commented and some people asked about Sean Marion, although Sean Marion was a 2010 player as
Right.
like a small forward. Even, I think he played power forward, but if you look at his size, he's a small forward.
That's right.
So he's a little easier. But Horace Grant and Mo Cheeks are actually fascinating players because people brought that up. And what they kind of have is if you look at stats in the NBA, you kind of have the, most greats spike, even Ben Wallace, Ben
Right.
Wallace and Dennis Rodman spike in rebounds, for instance. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant spike in points. These players just were very good in a lot of stats. They were, very good at rebounding, very good at scoring, but not great at any of those. But they were high enough. So they're very misleading people. And it is true because like Horace Grant at his heyday was not a 2010 guy. I think he's like, a 17-9. But he
No,
was just
no. His best year by yay points,
oh, okay.
15.1.
And then how many rebounds?
11.
Okay. Oh, so I got that a little off. So he was higher in rebounds. But yeah, I mean that's kind of the problem is, they were good but not great at these things, and that makes them hard to verify. But what's important in basketball, everybody says this. I notice people say this on Twitter a lot to me, but they don't mean it, where there's like defense matters, there's lots to basketball, there's more than just X. Like these players do that. There's more than one skill set that helps you succeed at basketball. These players had multiple skill sets. And it's interesting for them to be good but not great at multiple skill sets and hit all-time greatness with that.
Oh, absolutely. And again, if we start looking at it, if we really look at how do you contribute over time, sometimes the flashy ways aren't necessarily the best. The thing that has made Kobe so popular in his career is just that aesthetically, his game is very pleasing. He does a lot of things that a fan watches and says, wow, I could never do that. I could never jump that high. I could never hit those kinds of impossible shots. Meanwhile, overlooking the fact that you don't necessarily have to take impossible shots. In fact, if you take boring, easy shots but make a lot of them, that's actually better.
Yeah, and I mean, it's actually Russell Westbrook. So last night, Russell Westbrook came back. My wife and I went out to dinner at a sports bar, so I actually got to watch some of the game. Russell Westbrook looks amazing. I
Yes.
cannot dispute that. But, I looked at the box score after the game. And, despite the fact that, Russell Westbrook, I think, had like a coast-to-coast dunk at one point and, just completely shook this one guy and made just an amazing drive to the rim, his shooting was terrible. He shouldn't be
Right.
taking as many shots, but I agree, like he looks like it. And Kobe's the same way. They both have these, oh my goodness, how did they make that shot to go with 20-point games, 20-plus
Right.
point games? And that's why it's easy to understand why people overrate them.
Right. In fact, you shouldn't even put Russell Westbrook and Kobe in the same breath because Russell Westbrook's best true shooting percentage is 53.8.
Yeah, I mean,
It's horrendous.
I would be okay with people liking Russell Westbrook, but what's amazing to me, and I've been meaning to write this post, and I might not get it out there because it's one of these funny ones where I put too much research into it. Sometimes for a post to get out, you need to do less research so you don't have this gigantic amount of data to try and spew out in a post. But Kevin Durant's best true shooting month
Worst.
was
Or his best.
his
Got it.
best true shooting month, and third most in terms of most shots taken, including free throws, was the month Russell Westbrook was out. So I have a hard time believing the idea that Russell Westbrook is making things easier for Kevin Durant when the best month of his career was with Russell Westbrook out and playing with just kind of a mediocre guard and Reggie Jackson.
Right. And again, I have a lot of affection for Russell Westbrook. I'm an LA guy. He's an LA guy. He went to UCLA, and he does a lot of the things that you admire in a player. He plays hurt, he plays hard, he plays aggressively. But the fact is, the results on the field of play are only so-so.
And I mean, we might talk more about this and other things, but what's always interesting to me is we're both tech people. And one of the most annoying things about tech is just how often the rules change. You have a bunch of developers that know C++ and then Java comes along, or PHP will always be in demand. So there are always new rule. The rules change. You're a team that's stock. Like you could imagine if tomorrow they suddenly told Miami that LeBron James was worth they just nerfed LeBron James.
Right.
That happens all the time in the real world, but in basketball it doesn't, and that's what always drives me crazy when people talk about, looking at Russell Westbrook's value. It's like, I'm sorry, they set the value of what he's doing, and it's just not good.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there have been perceptions, changes in perception. I think it is the case that the favorite whipping boy, I think everyone's favorite whipping boy, Rudy Gay, would have been considered a good player in past eras. If you went back to the 1980s, you would say, "Wow, somebody really hit." I mean, a guy that comes from your history. Um, Dre, is there are a number of players on the Nuggets in the 1980s, thanks to the Doug Moe offense, who scored a ton of points. Now, you can tell me which of them were truly great, but folks like Alex English and Kiki Vandeweghe were scoring machines. But were they good players when they were doing that?
So like Kiki was interesting. Kiki is one of the most fascinating players in that regard because he was an amazing scorer, but overall he was not a good player. And
Right.
this is one of those things that people miss a lot in basketball, and it's not really easy to bring up with Kobe because he plays the weakest position, which is the shooting guard. But people seem to miss that if you're a basketball player, it's not enough for you to just score. You have to at least be par at your other duties on the court. And if you're really bad, like Kiki Vandeweghe was a forward who couldn't rebound, so it didn't matter that he scored a lot. He was costing his team. So people kind of miss that.
Right. Kiki Vandeweghe was an all-star for the Denver Nuggets. He was considered, a great player, and guess what? He wasn't really that good.
Oh, I love Kiki because, well, I have a love-hate with him because he transformed. I believe he's the one who got us Fat Lever. I believe he's the one that we traded for.
Ah, yes, Fat Lever, who along with the I guess a guy who I also thought of in the same category, Daryl Walker of the Wizards, who had the ability to really do interesting things, but was ignored because he didn't score a lot of points. I always used to say that Daryl Walker was the master of the triple single,
Triple. So what?
somehow managing to get something like 9 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists.
Oh, and yeah, I mean that's kind of the same thing we were talking about earlier with Horace Grant and Mo Cheeks, where they do a lot really well, but just not enough to look impressive. By the way, I'd put Fat Lever on the list, but sadly, like I said, the triathlon, I made it really hard, and still Kobe didn't come up on top.
Right.
Um, oh yeah, and so Brian is giving this to me. This just warms my heart. Someone once referred to Fat Lever as mini Magic Johnson, which is perfect. But it's Fat Lever recorded 46 triple doubles in 6 seasons. His time with the Nuggets was magical.
Yeah.
So I was going to say we should probably wrap up on Kobe a little bit.
Sure.
I know this was essentially a love fest to kind of the way of thinking we have at Boxscore Geeks and Wages of Wins. But anything else that stood out to you on the Kobe piece that you'd want to comment on before we move on?
Sure. I think that one thing that we should also remember is that basketball, while we think of it as a sport and we think of winning as really critical, is also a business. And, again, I think you've looked at it, and we know that winning tends to be the thing that drives business. But on the other hand, the Lakers have always sought to find ways to field a team of superstars, not just in terms of performance on the field, but in terms of cultural relevance and fame. The Buss family saw the Lakers as a tool of providing entertainment. And so Kobe Bryant undoubtedly provides more entertainment than a similarly productive player with a more boring style. And so as a result, I think that the Lakers valued him partially because of his entertainment value.
Yeah, I could buy that. And the only reason we kind of discussed this a little, I don't want to go too much in depth. The only reason I would kind of cut ties with Kobe is I think he has himself negated the natural advantage the Lakers have, which is the draw to play in LA.
So let's talk about that for a second. When I saw the news that the Lakers had given Kobe this absurdly large contract that he could never possibly live up to, even if he were 5 or 6 years younger, I wasn't particularly happy. On the other hand, what Kobe Bryant said is they offered me the contract and I took it. If somebody were to come to me and offer me 3 times what I was worth and offer to guarantee that money, I would probably say thank you and sign it. Or rather, I'd sign it and then say thank you. So I don't think I can fault Kobe too much. Again, the expectation has always been, hey, the player needs to sacrifice rather than the owner for the fans. And that's kind of a strange thing. I understand that, hey, I've made a lot of money in my career. I don't really need the money, therefore I can sacrifice. But on the other hand, Kobe's near the end of his career. It's not clear that sacrificing some money now will actually, pay off financially in the long run. If he were really about the rings, he would have told them, you can't pay me that money. That will prevent us from getting good players. Pay me $10 million a year. but he didn't. And so, in some sense, you would say, his talk of being all about the rings is false. But on the other hand, I would say his behavior is perfectly rational.
Oh, and to clarify, and we did an article about this. I am this is a funny thing with many athletes. There are parts of Kobe's personality that I don't have a lot of respect for. Off the court, he's done some things that I just can't condone. As a basketball player and a business person, I have the utmost respect for him. And that's the funny thing. We at the Wages of Wins and Boxscore Geeks, we talk a lot about being productive, about things to do to help your team win. Until the management starts paying for those things, I have absolutely no complaint with the player. In this entire drama, we insult the fans, we insult the owners, we insult the coaches. The only rational beings in this entire weird game that we regularly say is so messed up are the players who go, this is what gets me paid. And so I can't fault Kobe, I can't fault Melo, I can't fault Westbrook. All of them are going, I'm only going to play for 10 to 20 years. At 20 years is the tail end, right? That's like impossible.
Right.
I'm going to maximize my value in that time. So from that regard, yeah, utmost respect for Kobe.
Fair enough.
So on that note, and here's the funny part, I think the Lakers, even with Kobe, I don't know how good his evil German doctor is. I had an article up, and the Lakers seem to be doing their best to combat this. But basically, the next offseason is misleading because there's some big names available. LeBron James is going to be, can opt out. Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh can opt out. Melo, I think, has 1 year left on his contract and, is, arguing that he might not want to re-sign with New York. Not a surprise there. There are a ton of underrated players, I believe, and I think our commenters overvalue them. I think our commenters think they're going to get bigger contracts than they're going to. And so I listed 4 players,
right.
One of whom is already on the Lakers, who is Jordan Hill. And I'm amazed at the lack of love Jordan Hill gets in Los Angeles, at least from D'Antoni.
So from D'Antoni is his own being in and of himself. So again, in the case of Mike D'Antoni, it's pretty clear what you need to do to be a Mike D'Antoni player. You need to shoot threes and preferably be a point guard. He loves point guards. You notice how many point guards the Lakers had on their roster? Good Lord. And he loves power forwards who can theoretically people who are theoretically power forwards who can shoot. The entire roster was nothing but point guards and power forwards.
Yeah, so, even back in the Suns days, you had Amari and Marion, and arguably if that team had gotten a center without having to sacrifice one of those two, it would have looked a lot better off, I think.
Yeah, and it's also the case that I think that they just did run into some very bad luck in that Spurs series. They really did have a really good chance to beat the Spurs, and the Robert Horry checking Nash into the bench and Amare being out for the game really had a big impact. But anyways, in terms of Jordan Hill is a player that I feel like the Lakers fans really appreciate. And when the announcers are talking about him, they say, wow, Jordan Hill's out there, he's fighting. Good things always seem to happen when Jordan Hill's out there. But the bottom line is Mike D'Antoni is the coach, and he doesn't fit with D'Antoni's system, and so he doesn't play him, even though whenever Jordan Hill plays, the Lakers seem to do a lot better.
Well, one thing I'll say about this, and this is a fascinating line of thought that even some of our Wages of Wins compatriots, Mosey Platt and particularly, fall prey to, I've found, which is Jordan Hill doesn't get minutes because Mike D'Antoni doesn't give it to him. I've then seen people justify that Jordan Hill should not get minutes and could not play those minutes. So, for instance, what I've heard is Jordan Hill's style of play is such that he could not keep it up for 36 minutes. And I don't necessarily agree if that's true or not. But the other thing is, why on earth would you ever go for the logic of, I don't think they can do it, so I won't try it?
Well, again, people have argued for a long time, hey, this level of play is unsustainable if you can't just scale it up. Well, you know what is very sustainable? Rebounding. Rebounding tends to be very sustainable. When somebody like Kenneth Faried plays a lot of minutes and gets a lot of rebounds, very near and dear to your heart. I know he's had some issues.
He did that last night. Had an amazing night last night. Although
there you go.
It's against a terrible team, so I don't know how much credit I'll give it. But
fair enough. So I completely disagree with the argument that he couldn't play more minutes. There have been plenty of times when he's played 30 or 40 minutes and he had great games. I think somebody even did a statistical analysis that showed that the more he played, the better he did. Now, part of that may be the better he played, the more D'Antoni was forced to play him. But the fact remains that there is no evidence whatsoever that playing Jordan Hill more minutes results in poorer results.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of their argument is, the injury prone idea. He plays a very physical game, so that might
He
impact him.
is injury prone. There is no question. He has been injured a lot during his time with the Lakers and with a lot of funky, weird injuries, hip injuries and surgeries and what have you. But that being said, would you rather have the guy get injured or would you rather have wins? You don't know that the guy's going to get injured. You do know that you're going to have fewer wins if you don't play him more.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just remarkable to me that they have that on their team. I did an article that asked if he could be the future star for the Lakers. Fans weren't with me on that one, but he's this amazing guy, and all the Lakers kind of need to do is play him. On following up on that though, and this is where I'm really curious. So both not Jimmy, I believe Jeannie Buss and Phil Jackson are going to be at Sloan. We have a special T-shirt made up that I'm hoping to get a picture next to Phil Jackson with. I'm gonna really be looking for that. But, I think the Lakers could rebuild in a season or two. Even with Kobe's contract, even the funny thing is, even with Kobe's contract, if the Lakers make savvy moves and then just accept Kobe being gone in 3 seasons, the Lakers could essentially do a fast forward of Magic Johnson. I mean, essentially that happened to them here. Pau Gasol
Right.
declined much faster than we'd have expected.
That's
and
right.
Certainly, it's got to be salt in the. If I'd have known that, because I wrote against the Chris Paul trade at the time, had I known Pau Gasol was just going to take a nosedive, I would be furious at that Chris Paul trade being.
As it turns out, looking back, that Chris Paul trade would have been a massive steal for the Lakers. Massive, 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 and David Stern vetoed it.
Which is, I mean, that was fascinating. I think that there is it's good that he ended up on the Clippers. I mean, it's good that he ended up in a big market, but keeping Chris Paul from being in a big market was just a mistake on the league's part. And they kind of lucked out that they got a second chance.
Right. And the other fact is that the Pelicans didn't get a much better deal later on. The big thing that they got was Eric Gordon. Whoop-de-doo.
That was I mean, the first trade was better. I mean, at the time, it was much, much better. In hindsight, it's not that great, but that's only because, Pau Gasol and Lamar Odom just tanked.
Fell off a cliff.
And there are very good reasons for that. So I don't know how to quite tie these together. Actually, I do want to talk a bit. If you're okay going a little over on this topic.
Absolutely.
Because there are a few players. There's like Ori, Cephalosha. I believe I listed Ori, Cephalosha, Lance Stephenson, and Jordan Hill. Do you think the Lakers have it in them to actually attack a savvy player in free market?
I think they do. I think that when it comes to the Lakers, the key is that their goal is to put out a relatively entertaining team. And I think that some of those players would fit with that and some of those players wouldn't. Kyle Lowry, Lance Stephenson, those guys fit with being entertaining. Those are athletic guys. They push the ball. Stephenson especially is a maniac with his fast-breaking style. And so they would fit very well with the Lakers. Tabo, not the most exciting of players, perhaps not the guy that the Lakers would reach out for, although the Lakers historically have shown they appreciate the underrated role players. So they've had the Robert Ories and the AC Greens and the Rick Foxes and so on and so forth. They've always had those guys around.
Throw Lamar Odom out? You told me not saying Lamar Odom on a previous podcast.
I'm not going to say Lamar Odom because Lamar Odom was not underrated. He won a 6th Man of the Year award. He was considered an all-star caliber player, and he got the recognition. Folks like AC Green did not get that recognition.
AC Green is ridiculous. I did not realize how good he was. He didn't have as good of a prime, but he is one of those players that was ridiculous when it came to longevity of just playing really well for a long time.
And something else that a lot of people don't know is that when he was with the Lakers during his first stint, one of the things they did is they used him to hide Kareem on defense. So they used AC Green to guard the centers. So not only was he playing power forward and grabbing rebounds and being extremely effective that way, he was also actually providing the defense against the top centers in the league.
Yeah, back when Kareem stopped being the dominant Kareem.
Well, he was 41 years old.
Yeah, I mean, Kareem is ridiculous. I mean, you can't really fault it. And the same thing we were talking about with Kobe. If you know your career is going to end, and in Kareem's case, it's been a shame. And, this is other skills, right? That's what everybody talks about.
That's right.
I don't quite understand it. I would be very interested to meet and talk to Kareem to find out what he's like, because it seems he's very intelligent, he's very smart, he's written lots of books, produced a few documentaries that are enjoyable, and so it's remarkable to me to find out he can't climb any other ladders as well.
So again, having when Kareem was in LA as a beloved player, he still wasn't as popular as Magic. He's not an outgoing guy. He's kind of an introvert. He kind of doesn't suffer fools gladly. The guy who would be equivalent up in the Bay Area would be Rick Barry, great Hall of Fame player who, guess what? Everyone thinks he's a jerk and nobody really wants to work with him.
Yeah, anyway, sorry. Yeah, I got us way off there. But yeah, I think the Lakers, I think you're right. I would be curious to see if they'd go after Cephalosha or Lance Stephenson. And I definitely think they can pry him from those two teams, because I think those two, like I pointed out in the article, the reason I listed these 4 players, and the Lakers are included with Jordan Hill. I really hope they just fire D'Antoni and keep Jordan Hill. But all of these teams have a problem with these players, and there's a reason the players might pry free.
That's right. And the other thing I would note about the Lakers is they actually have a very promising young player who's been playing very well this season, Kendall Marshall, who actually has been doing very well from a productivity standpoint, has dramatically improved his three-point shooting, and has been a classic example of D'Antoni picking someone up off the scrap heap, and if he fits D'Antoni's game, turning him into something that's a really valuable asset. He's, I think, got a wins produced of about .17, 175 or so, which is pretty remarkable for a guy they picked up off the D-League scrap heap.
Yeah, I mean, he was, and Kendall Marshall, by the way, on that regard, is the type of player, the Nuggets, for instance, we won't get to talk much about this, just traded for Aaron Brooks. Now,
oh, God. Why?
I don't I actually did, despite the fact that I wailed in pity at the internet when it happened. I wasn't that against, I believe Jordan Hamilton's the player they traded. He's been playing productively this season. But if you're going to say, okay, we need some help at the point guard, it's like, why do you go for an old player? Go for a young player with potential. Don't go for an old player where you know what they've got. On that kind of note, like I said, your background, you're a VC right now. You've been in the Bay Area for forever at this point, it seems like. I think by Bay Area standards, I worked at Google for 2 years, and I was ancient there by the time I left.
That's right.
So you've been in the Bay Area over a decade, so that's, I don't know what that counts as in Bay Area years.
A lifer.
A lifer. But, Patrick brought up an article about Rudy Gay. Rudy Gay has a $20 million contract on the table for next season. One of his options, though, is he can opt out and sign a longer deal. He could sign a 5-year deal now. The thing is, it's unlikely that he is going to get offered $20 million a season or anywhere close to it on his next contract. Even if Sacramento is absurd enough to believe he was worth the trade, which he wasn't. By the way, I don't know if you've met. I believe he's going to be at Sloan. I don't know how that interaction is going to go. He's actually got a name of one of our bloggers, but Vivek Ranadev, I believe is his last name.
Ah, yes.
I have no idea.
The owner of the Kings.
I have no idea. He showed up in Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, as using unconventional styles, realizing scoring wasn't all that mattered in basketball. He takes over the Kings, and he re-signs DeMarcus Cousins. He trades for Rudy Gay. He trades his role players for scorers. And I kind of go, didn't you read the story about yourself?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the jury's still out. He's definitely a very smart guy. I don't know him personally, but I know even some of the people who work for him. And one of the interesting things to know is that, at his company, he actually has a number of their top scientists and what have you looking at basketball statistics. They probably shouldn't be doing that. There's probably some sort of dereliction of shareholder duty there. But he is definitely interested. He's not a disinterested, detached donor.
What I will say to that, and this always pains me, and I've been Patrick also had an article. Sorry, Brian, because Brian gives me updates as to where we're at, and we're going over, but that's okay. I've got a hard stop at 6:30, so don't worry, I won't keep either of you late. But watching Data Ball, which was the article he talked about.
That's right.
Kurt Goldsberry is a Harvard researcher that's doing research into basketball, and when I look at this stuff, one of the things. Brian says he can go for hours. But when I look at this, I go, your research is interesting, but you're not, and I think Patrick said this, you're not asking the right questions. And if you don't ask the right questions, it doesn't matter how much more data, how much more sophisticated you get, you're not going to get anything good out of your research.
That's right.
And this is one of the things that always frightens me watching super smart, savvy guys take over teams, is that when you observe what they're asking, you go, until you change your frame of reference and know what to ask, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're going down a rabbit hole.
Well,
At least that's mine.
I think that it'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next decade or so. So historically, there hasn't been a lot of tech entrepreneur involvement in basketball. Mark Cuban was kind of the first, and he's a little unusual case as well because he's not from Silicon Valley and he sort of took a different path to success. But guys like Vivek, guys like the owner of the Memphis Grizzlies, I think also the folks who are involved with the Warriors up here in the Bay Area.
Orlando Magic recent owner? I think he was an Apple guy, wasn't he?
That's a good question. I haven't been following that very carefully. That would be interesting to note as well. But the thing that people learn from the startup process is that it's very iterative and that you try things, you see whether or not they work, and then you try different things. There's not the same sort of respect for tradition. It's not the entire tech industry is based on saying, hey, there's a better way to do things. So I imagine they'll try doing things in various ways. They may be right or not about the first iteration, but they'll probably keep iterating after that. I think you see some of that with the Warriors, who have continued to iterate on their team. They made a trade deadline pickup, bringing in Steve Blake, who I think is a good backup point guard. He's not a star, but he's going to help them out. And they traded Monte Ellis, a classic Yay points character, for Andrew Bogut, who doesn't score in double figures but is enormously valuable. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I would say that in a decade we'll know whether having a tech entrepreneurial background is going to significantly positively impact ownership. And Cuban, by the way, has done pretty well for himself as well.
Yeah, we'll just have to have an entire podcast on this. I will say Jeremy Britton and I, another tech guy. Have you guys ever met? I think I've tried to get you guys to meet several times, and
we haven't physically met, but we'll get a chance. I actually have put him in touch with some other people for some other things, but we will meet in person at some point, I'm sure.
It seems ridiculous. Yeah, of the Wages of Wins network, which spans the globe, we've got Seattle, we got Utah, we got Puerto Rico. We got some West Coasters, Vivek and Ari are, out in the East Coast. So We're all over the place. You and Jeremy are like right next to each other, and I think you haven't met. So that's funny to me, but understandable because I understand how busy both of you are.
It's also the case that Bay Area is remarkably fractured. So, Jeremy, I think, is in the South Bay, and I'm on the peninsula, and we don't go up to the city. And so it's like none of us wants to move more than 5 miles from our home base.
Well, that actually makes sense. I don't like driving around California. The traffic there is terrible.
Yes.
But just to wrap that up, Jeremy has kind of talked about that being sometimes a disadvantage to the tech field, where there are many areas where there has like design. He's a designer. There have been years and years of design work done and foundations laid, and then you notice that when tech people make UIs, they ignore common things and kind of rediscover things that have been known for years. And basketball, well, there have been many people that go in the wrong directions. There are, we have smart players, and Dr. J, I loved reading him. He understood the game back in the 70s, and he was talking about it. In his book, he was like, I think you need to score better than 50% from the field for it to be a good shot. And I just read that, and I was like, I love you, Dr. J. I don't care that you stop my Nuggets from winning. So I think with the tech field, there is, that hubris can sometimes hurt in terms of established research that is actually valuable.
I would agree with that, and I think that again, part of it is they're going to have to find their way. Every new owner sort of wants to make his mark in some way. Usually, it doesn't result in a championship, and then they have to regroup and decide to do something different. To pull it full circle, hopefully that happens with the Lakers as well and Jimmy Buss. Either that, or hopefully he's forced to sell to his sister Jeannie, and we see a Lakers renaissance under her reign.
I will say Phil Jackson. I mean, his book was interesting because there was a lot of superlative in it, and I always kind of bristle a little because you can't know that that's right. He had two very amazing characteristics. One was he was great at talent evaluation. Mm-hmm. All the numbers bear this out. When you look at he was one of the people behind Rodman. He told Buss, we need to move on Rodman, right? Like, he's on the market. I know he's volatile, but we need to get him now. If we don't get him now, we'll miss out, and I think I can work with him. So he was a great talent evaluator. He was also a great person in that he was he was willing to change, right? He was able to
That's
work
right.
with Kobe. He was able to work with Michael. He worked with a lot of big people, and he was, fluid around them. And I think if the Lakers adopt more of that, as opposed to saying, like what D'Antoni's doing, this is my system. If you don't fit in my system, I'm not going to play you. That's not how it would work under Phil, right? Phil would say, Jordan Hill, you're too good not to play. I will find a way. Wow, this is
Yeah.
way off. This is way off the track of Rudy Gay, but bringing it back to
Oh,
that.
yes, of course. So let me comment just a little bit on the concept of the net present value of the NBA contracts and the like. So there are a lot of comments from the readers talking about, hey, is this the right discount rate? Hey, can you actually get an insurance policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The best way to look at it is something that you and I discussed earlier, which is that as an NBA player, there's a lot of risk inherent in your profession. It's not likely to last a long time. Somebody could be Danny Granger and have a massive contract and then get injured and never be able to really get another contract again. We've seen players like Amari Stoudemire go from max to completely useless in roughly the span of 8 months. Now, of course, in the case of Amari, we knew it was crazy to pay the money for him. But again, somebody did. So there's an inherent level of risk involved. So it's not just a question of what kind of return can they get on investments. It's really a question of, hey, what are the chances that I'll actually be able to continue to get these contracts? And the fact is, a single catastrophic injury changes everything. So the utility curve of money is largely nonlinear. And what I mean by that is, every dollar is not worth the same. They're worth different amounts to you based on how much happiness you can get out of it. And so as a result, a player like Rudy Gay, who is looking at a situation where, maybe he plays another season, does well, and can get a great return. Maybe he gets injured and basically goes on the scrap heap, may say, you know what? I've got a chance. Let's say that I offered you the following choice. Let's say Rudy Gay can either opt out or not opt out. And if Rudy Gay opts out and signs a guaranteed contract for $55 million, that's $55 million for the next 5 years. If Rudy Gay chooses not to opt out, there is a good possibility that he earns his $20 million and then can sign another contract for 40 or 50 million on top of that. But there's also a slight chance that he earns that $20 million and sometime next year suffers an injury and doesn't earn that much more over the rest of his career. So if you're an NBA player with a lot of expenses, like these are not guys driving Accords. I mean, a guy like Matt Bonner is pretty rare. These are guys who are carrying a hefty household, a lot of expenses. It's very hard to make it work without that money coming in. They may very well say, you know what, I can't take the downside chance of only making $20 million for the rest of my career.
I would agree with that. And I mean, so part of that's what reducing variance, because part of it is in that scenario, if we're looking at it like a poker player, and it's much easier for poker players, stock, people who pick stocks who deal in large volume, right? Because you play thousands of poker hands, you trade thousands of stocks,
Right.
you have one NBA career. Because what you'd probably say is, okay, 9 million, right? You're betting 9 million that you will, you're saying the risk you'll get injured is enough that 9 million plus. Understand that even injured players, injured stars, still get paid. It's worth noting, and he was with the Lakers at the time, which is fascinating to me. Sam Bowie, despite being regarded one of the biggest draft busts ever, had a longer than average NBA career.
Yes.
Had two one and a half very good seasons.
Yes.
And he chose to retire. He did not leave. Like, he was not forced out of the league. He told the Lakers, they offered him a contract, and he said, look, I'm sorry, I just can't deal with the injuries. I'm done.
Right.
And he went and bred horses, which is interesting. So, even if Rudy Gay got injured, we noticed this. Players still get paid. Greg Oden is down to $1 million, but that's because this is like his third chance, right? He was signed to both extensions with the Warriors while injured. He wasn't able to play during either of them. So this is his third time getting an extension. And, the value dropped each time. But I would still argue this formula we're talking about gets very interesting because there's how much can I get paid if I stay healthy? What are the odds I get injured? How much can I get paid if I get injured? And then am I willing to take the risk between those two?
Right. And if the utility curve, if you're looking with a range of possibilities that range from $90 million to $70 million to $20 million, you basically say, you might say to yourself, you know what, that the upside of the additional 20 or 30 million that I make is not worth even a small risk of the downside of making 30 or 40 million less. There's
Yeah.
that concept of loss aversion where people are very reluctant to lose money. And again, in that case, people might very well take a loss minimization framework.
And I mean, it's that's almost understandable too, because if you tell someone, look, there's a really, really good chance you make $100,000 next year, but there's also a non-trivial chance that you lose all of your money. It is understandable if people want to turn that down. And
Yes.
Rudy Gay might do that. So I can see both sides of this to be fair.
Right. Now, again, I think that ultimately it doesn't matter too much. $20 million is still a fair amount of money. I would be happy for somebody paying me $20 million a year. That would be a very good outcome. So I think Rudy will be fine either way. But I think it's understandable that he actually is thinking about this. It's not just a question of, hey, Rudy doesn't understand math or Rudy doesn't understand how finance works. There actually is a real risk that's involved here. And having a long-term contract in the NBA where it is completely guaranteed is a very useful thing to have.
I will say Al S. wrote a question. And Al S., you're a great commenter who comments a lot, and we appreciate you. So just throwing that out there, I realize we don't say enough thanks to some of our commenters. I'll try and fix that. Sorry, Brian, I didn't give you advance notice on ones I want to talk about. But he wrote, he only assumes, Patrick writes about a Lloyd's of London policy, and Al S. commented on that about saying, he worries about assumptions. But that is the second question. Can Rudy Gay go to a major insurance firm and say, I'm probably worth $80 million over the next 5 years or whatever, but there's a non-trivial chance I get injured, so I want to insure against the odds that I get injured against that contract. If he can do that, then that changes everything. I'd actually be really curious to know if there have been any professional sports stars that do that and what rates said insurance agencies would do. I think I'll try and see if I can track someone down on that. I'm really interested in that.
And the short answer, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I have dealt with insurance in the past. The answer is probably no, in the sense that he cannot get an insurance policy that would cover the entirety of his potential loss. The way that the insurance policies usually come into play is that a player may be considering going back to school and opting out of a draft, and as a result, they can go. His parents, usually it's a him, obviously, can go ahead and maybe buy an insurance policy. Now, an insurance policy is not going to be a $60 million insurance policy. It's going to be like a $5 million insurance policy. They simply won't write you an insurance policy of much larger than a certain amount because it introduces things like moral hazard and what have you. So you could never get full protection even if you went out into the markets and looked for it. The only way you might be able to do it is if you did something a little unusual like what Arian Foster did this year, where there was a startup that was offering to sell off basically a portion of his future earnings in exchange for cash up front. He did that and then, of course, got promptly injured, which just goes to show you that maybe Arian Foster is a financial genius.
Arian Foster was on a documentary I just called Schooled. It's one of those few areas that gets me riled up. I actually yelled at a chancellor of a school on Twitter based on his comments in said documentary. But Arian Foster was on that, and he was an amazing person to listen to. Very intelligent.
Very smart guy.
Yeah, he needs. It's funny. There are certain players. We're winding down, so I'll just throw out other names. But like Mick Foley is a former professional wrestler.
Mankind.
I sincerely hope, I would love to talk to him about why he kept it up for as long as he did, because he clearly could have financially quit much earlier in his career and clearly put a lot of his health, known hazards and unknown hazards, at risk. And a lot of professional athletes do this, and it's a really interesting question to me to go.
The answer is very simple. It is a high of experience that they cannot get otherwise. They're wise enough to know that if they leave, they won't have the same thing. If you talk to a lot of veterans of wartime, you're talking about risking your life, having to do unspeakable things. And yet many of them will tell you those were the greatest days of their life, though they never felt more alive than when they were out there risking their lives, and they wish they could do it again. The experience is really important to people.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just, to me, looking back, I'm like, you're an amazing author, you're an amazing orator, and we may lose you much sooner than we should because you kept at it. And it's much easier for me, being a boring desk guy, to go, you could have quit 10 years earlier and just started writing books. Why didn't you just?
Once you have 50,000 people shouting your name, and all of them are screaming your name, and it's clear that you're filled with this energy, you're filled with this incredible feeling. You don't want to give it up.
And I will say this, by the way, because I'm sure Mankind, Mick Foley, is a big Chris Ye fan, and he's going to watch this
I
podcast.
hope so too.
He needs to come through Denver. He's going to North Dakota. My grandmother can go see Mick Foley. He's now doing stand-up comedy. She can go see him. I can't. He's not coming through Denver. That's not fair. So, Mankind, if you're watching, and by the way, I do this a lot on podcasts. Thank you, Brian, for giving me the rope. Normally he's a slightly more stringent producer, but I think he let us go today. Yeah, I know we got to asking Mankind to do stand-up comedy, not in North Dakota. So clearly we've gotten off. We hit all the topics I wanted to. I loved having you on. I'm really hoping in the near future we can have you on again to talk more stuff. I apologize we didn't get you on last week because I wanted to promote you. You're doing Race for the Cure again.
Yes, actually, people can still, the Cycle for Survival, people can still actually donate. They can go to my blog or any other place and just look up Chris Ye and Cycle for Survival. They're taking donations through April 1st. We've already raised more money this year than we did last year, so I think it's an all-time high of over $18 million for rare cancer research. It all goes to, maybe not directly to Ari, but it goes to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Every single dollar raised goes to cancer research, or possibly to Ari's dream of owning an NBA team. And so if you have a chance, please do go ahead and donate.
Oh, I'm so glad of it. I thought I had missed the deadline. So I did make sure to hop in and get my donation in last week.
Much appreciated.
And so everybody should make sure to do that, because if you donate, I believe what are you offering for it?
So I believe that what it is if you donate $20, I'll answer an email question of yours. If you donate $50, I'll hop on the phone and talk with you. If you donate $100 and you're in the Bay Area, you can even stop by and see me. And if you donate $500, I'll actually take you out to lunch. And somebody did donate $500 this year, so thank you very much.
Oh, that's a fantastic. That is definitely worth it. Like I said, I treasure the time you can come onto the podcast. Yeah, like many others in the Wages of Wins network, you've got the busy cycle. So, like I said, it's hard for you to even meet up with Jeremy, who lives in the same town as you do. So it makes sense that it's harder to get time for the Denverites. So yes, definitely do that. Apologies for getting the name wrong, for calling it, I said Race for the Cure. It's Cycle for Survival.
Not a problem. I'm sure the cancer patients will forgive you.
All right. But yeah, definitely do that. And are there anything to end on? I was going to say, yeah, the one thought I'll shout out for myself. Arturo, myself, we are working on getting Patrick a ticket, but we don't know if we'll be able to in time. But the Boxscore Geeks will be representing. We have 3 new T-shirts that have been designed courtesy of Jeremy Britton, and we will be at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference that's going on next week. Brian has volunteered to try and produce if we get time, so we'll definitely try and get some recorded media for you to enjoy it with us. So that's my shout out. If you're going to Sloan, ping me and Arturo at Nerd Numbers on Twitter, or at Arturo Galletti on Twitter, and let us know so we get a chance to see you.
Awesome.
And then as for yourself, you are Adventures in Capitalism.
Yes, or they can just follow at Chris Ye on Twitter.
Yep, and I think we'll leave it at that for now. And yeah, I'll let you have the final word on the podcast to send us out on.
I would just say that this is a very sad moment for a Laker fan. I checked the standings today, and the Lakers and the Kings are tied for last in the Pacific Division at 18 and 36. All I can say is, as far as the Lakers go, I think that at this point all Lakers fans are just hoping that they continue to lose as much as possible.
Yeah, there's not much. I mean, I think Lakers fans are crazy enough that they pay regardless, right? Like, Lakers tickets will always sell, so I don't think there's any hurt. That's a funny thing in the tanking annals, right? You don't normally see this. Such a franchise like the Lakers, you don't see a team that is guaranteed to keep selling out high-priced tickets that can keep losing, at least for a little. All right.
And guess what? The TV deal doesn't come up for renewal for 10 years. They got plenty of time to get another superstar.
Oh, they'll be fine. I said, I looked at their history. In 4 years, they're going to have Kevin Love and who's another great, up and comer that, Arturo would answer this, would have like 5 different scenarios in a heartbeat.
Well, I think that most people are actually hoping it's Kevin Love and Kevin Durant for the 2 Kevin team.
Wow, that could have happened. I hope that does happen, because I also want Kevin Durant to get a ring, and I don't know if he'll get it in OKC.
Lakers fans are just hoping that the Thunder continue to lose the big games, that Kevin Durant continues to get frustrated.
Okay, that is a fantastic thing to end on. So I think I'll let Brian send us out.